Hello! My name is Apollo and welcome to the Pantheon. Today's video is the continuation of our 12-part series where we will break down one of the 12 literary devices that are essential to making our stories amazing. Now you might be scratching your head wondering what a literary device is. Of course we explained this in our introduction to this series video, but just to recap, literary devices are techniques that writers use to express our ideas more clearly and enhance our writing. They will help bring out important concepts, strengthen the plot, create relatable characters, enhance the theme, it'll help with pacing, and there's so much more that these devices will do. In this series, the literary devices that we will cover are characters, plot, theme, genre, setting, conflict, symbolism, perspective, mood, tone, foreshadowing, and then the solution/resolution. Understanding each literary device will effectively enhance our story. Checking to make sure that we have all 12 literary devices included in our story's plan will help us to create a more cohesive story and make for a more enjoyable reading experience to our audience. Each of these devices will receive their own detailed video, and depending on the response, possibly companion videos. You can think of this series as a one-on-one guide or beginner videos for new writers. However, each of these literary devices are essential to building the foundation of great stories, which means all skill levels can benefit. So let's dive right into our first literary device, characters. As writers, we all know, or at least I hope you know, that a story can't exist without characters. But why are characters so important to the story? Before answering that, I want you to ask yourself, without them, how does the audience know who to follow in the story? Who to root for? Where would our emotional connection to the story come from? In my opinion, characters are the heart of most stories. And as webcomic creators, it's even more important to realize that the characters we design are the literal faces of the story. Think about it. Readers actually have a solid image of something to latch onto, which makes them even more important and impactful to the story. I want you to think about the stories that literally pique your interest because a character had an awesome design on the cover. Now, this isn't a character design video, which I think I'll make in the future, but it's important to realize that not only do characters' personalities need to be complex and three-dimensional in our webcomic, but it's equally as important, maybe even more so, for the artistic designs to be fleshed out and reveal silent details about the character. I want you to think again about characters and just at a glance how you're able to understand that from their appearance that they're evil or lazy or bubbly without the narration ever telling you who these characters are. We immediately know based off of their design what their personalities are. And this applies even if our characters are all wearing uniforms. Simple details like jewelry, hairstyle, colors, and so much more can make our characters more appealing to us and to our readers. So how do we get started crafting these amazing characters that will be the heart of our stories? Personally, I think this kind of depends on the project and the person. Some stories are born out of the characters, while others begin with the plot that in turn shapes the characters. Despite this, there are key concepts all writers will eventually need to know to develop their characters. On the screen, I've listed 9 points that are important to the development. We have the motivation, the background, basic personality type, the voice, skills, flaws, flair, uniqueness, the character connections, and the character arc. Now let's review each one of these, and I'll explain why it's important to work with these 9 points. Starting with motivation. Motivation is the key to what is driving the character in the story. This is what will keep them going throughout the entire story. Without a strong motivation, your character's actions may come across illogical. So here's a warning to all new creators. Keep the motivation simple. You can add layers to it, but at its core, don't make their motivation a 10-page essay explaining why your character is doing what he's doing. If you can explain the reasoning in less than 5 sentences, I would say rework it. An example of a character with a strong motivation that shapes all their actions in the story Scarlet from I'm the Grim Reaper. So definitely check that out, and I feel like from the very first episode, you instantly know what this character is about and why she's motivated to do what she does. So after this, I like to focus on the character as a person and what influences them as an individual. And nothing does this more than their background. How did they grow up? Who were their friends? And who were their influences? What are their hobbies, their interests? What do they do for fun? What are their relationships that will influence them? What's their trauma? See, in reality, these things help to shape who we are, where we've been, what we're doing, where we want to go. Now, I've seen some crazy background templates, and I don't want to discourage you, especially if you're just embarking on your writing journey and you're having a lot of fun developing this portion of your character. But as creators, we can end up spending a huge amount of time developing unnecessary details for our characters. So again, even with backgrounds, you want to keep it simple. Reflect on the character's motivation and determine how their background can enhance that motivation. And realistically, we are not going to be able to figure out every single detail, every aspect before writing our story. Some things will only be developed as we write the story. An example of a character with a very impactful backstory that shapes all of their actions in the story is Sasuke from Naruto. Everything, and I literally mean everything, that Sasuke did reflected his past and played a part throughout the entire story. Next, let's jump on to character personality. So giving a character a strong personality type is extremely important. There are a lot of ways to come up with these personality types, like using a personality test, zodiac signs, Arthur templates, etc. And later I'll explain how I create my characters. The issue with this is a lot of people try to focus on the character being too balanced or too well-rounded, where it creates essentially a flat character. Now this is where archetypes come in. Following a particular archetype can actually be really helpful when first developing the character. I'm not saying you have to stick to it, that we don't have to follow an archetype to the letter. Remember, we can subvert the archetype, turn the personality upside down. Maybe you have the sweet, bubbly character archetype, and actually it's a facade. And they're actually the villain of the story. We don't have to limit their traits to what we're given. It just needs to make sense to the reader. Explain why the character's personality is designed this way. A great example of characters that follow archetypes but subvert them and feel like real people is the entire cast of the series Horimiya. These characters are unique in how the dynamics of their personalities adjust and change depending on the characters they're interacting with, and yet it still stays true to the characters at their core. None of their actions feel out of place or forced. It's a great case study to improve developing a character's personality type. Next, let's look at voice. Voice is one of my favorite things to give a character. A unique voice for a character, the way they think, the way they talk, the way the dialogue can reflect their personality. This takes a lot of thought when writing because things we normally say will not reflect the tone of the voice of that character or the way that they speak. So we really have to buckle down here. Let's do a quick exercise on this. Let's say a character is the richest man in the world and he's extremely arrogant. Now, here's the line of dialogue that we as the writer want him to say. I own many things. So that's pretty simple, right? However, let's add this line with the character's voice. All things in the world belong to me. Can you see the difference? The character basically says the same thing, but so many things are added because of the character's voice. We get arrogance, maybe even a bit of delusion. This character clearly thinks he's hot stuff, so it adds to the fun of the character and it makes them feel even more alive. The way a character speaks can reveal their social status, their background, their mental state, and so much more depending on how much we understand the character as a whole. There are so many characters with unique and interesting voices. For example, we have Harley Quinn from DC Comics, Gilgamesh from the Fate series, Kotaro from Kotaro Lives Alone. The only way to improve a character's voice is to study how others speak. This will include people in our everyday lives, characters in books and TV shows, as well as historical individuals. We all speak differently, and that means our characters should too. Our next point, skills. One of the biggest means of influence over a character that we'll be able to have is the skills that they have. Now, these can come in terms of strengths and weaknesses, so I want you to think about the assets our characters must have in order to overcome their obstacles. This can be anything from being a persuasive speaker to understanding advanced chemistry equations, and try to give them skills that will be useful and relevant to the story. What our characters are good at and what they're not great at will affect how they perceive different events. What actions they choose to take can affect their overall character arc, which we'll touch on later. If our character's strength is they are a master strategist and they can think 10 steps ahead before making any moves, then this might be an asset for them throughout their entire journey. However, if this is our character's weakness, let's say they are impulsive and never think things through, it can be used to create conflict for them. These skills will help to shape our character arcs and the plot. Like, if you do not know anything else, know these pretty well before you start writing. An interesting example of this is Lloyd from The Greatest Real Estate Developer and Mai from Ascendance from a Bookworm. Both characters have unique knowledge that plays a crucial part in moving the story forward. Next, let's hit on the flaws. Now, this part goes hand in hand with the skills, and I think it would be easiest to develop these at the same time that we're developing our characters' useful skills. It's hard to give our characters flaws because a lot of us may feel like if we give them flaws that people won't like our characters. After all, we want people to love them, right? But a perfect character is not a lovable character. It's just not realistic. These are often called, I think, Mary Sue characters, which, to be honest, I don't have an issue with Mary Sue's, but you have to be careful with what story you put them in. Comment below if you want me to do a video about using a Mary Sue usefully. The more you try to make your character flawless, the less readers can relate, and therefore they'll lose likability. I like to think of flaws in terms of major and minor flaws. A major flaw will hinder the character throughout the entire story, whereas a minor flaw may only affect a specific part of the story or be closer to a mistake a character makes in a scene. A wonderful example of a flawed character is Violet Evergarden, which, don't make me gush about my favorite character and one of my favorite animes, but hear me out. This character's flaw is multi-dimensional. It's used for comedy, it's used for learning, for drama, and even part of the main theme in the story. Chef's kiss. So a flaw isn't necessarily a negative for a character. In some instances, it can be the character's greatest weapon. Our next part, flair or uniqueness. Now, flair is one aspect that I think, especially for comic characters, is really important because this directly is connected to the character's design. Especially for all of you crazy kids who have a main cast over 3, flair is what sets them apart from each other, and it creates visual interest and intrigue. It can also reveal a character's personality, their background, career, social status, whatever. And this applies to characters who are wearing the exact same uniform. We want each character to stand out as an individual, and a perfect way to do this is to give each character an identifying feature that's unique only to them. Now, you don't have to give each character some crazy hair color or style, but try to not have your entire cast look the same. If you have a main character with black straight hair, then have the next character maybe have blue short hair. A great example of this is the entire cast of One Piece. All of the male characters have unique and identifiable looks only to them. Luffy has his hat, Zoro has his hair color, Usopp has his nose. So studying media with large casts will help us to be able to create characters that are completely unique in our story and give them an edge with memorability and connecting them to the audience. Now we've hit on character connections. So a character's connection is one of the easiest ways to make a more well-developed character. Seeing how a character reacts and interacts with certain characters can be very revealing of the character's personality. Not to mention, the more characters that are actually logically connected to each other, the more meaningful a scene or an event can be within the story. Two great examples of this are Alexseid and Shelter. In both series, characters play a major role in the other characters' lives, and even minor characters come into play, being looped back around into the story because of connection that they have to other characters, which deepens the meaning of that new character's interactions with an already established character. We're on our last point, the character arc. A character arc is used to describe the inner and outer journey, which can be physical, mental, and emotional. It's something that the character experiences throughout the duration of the entire story or plot. Our protagonist or our main character requires a character arc for their storyline and journey to be captivating and satisfying to readers. When your character comes out at the end of the book as a transformed person, in a certain sense, it's a character arc. A wonderful example of an amazing character arc is Boji from Ranking of Kings, another one of my favorites. He starts out as a boy looked down upon for multiple reasons. But as the story goes on, Boji learns that being different is his greatest weapon, and it's used to save his entire kingdom and gain their respect. Okay, a little side tangent here. If you have not read this series, it is literally a masterpiece. Like, it blew me away. It made me question my existence as a writer. But okay, I'm gonna jump off of that. So an important point to keep in mind as we go down this checklist is to keep things simple. A lot of these points can be time consuming. And my suggestion would be to develop until you have a clear idea of the character. Be able to answer, who is this character at their core? What is their purpose in the story? What's stopping them from obtaining their goal? And who will they become at the end of the story? So after all of that, you may be asking yourself, if I do all of this, does that mean I have a well-developed character? And let me just be honest here. The cold hard truth, the simple answer is no. Like, I'm sorry, it's just no. See, this specific topic of what makes a well-developed character is complicated, which it could be an entire video all on its own. This is a starting point for you. These 9 points are to get you going, to make you feel more comfortable as you develop your character. So a detailed character profile will help to shape the narrative, as well as provide a useful reference point for the character's personality traits, their background, their goals, the flaws, the challenges, the conflicts, and so much more, but it doesn't guarantee that this character is going to be well developed. Well, why is that? Because with anything, it takes practice to figure out your process. Think of a literal child and a master writer developing a character. Let's say they both followed the checklist that I mentioned above. Do you think that the way the master writer develops his character will be comparable to a child who's new to writing? So there is a learning curve, and that will only get better with more time, more writing, more studying. Of course, our readers and us, like we as the writer, want well-developed three-dimensional character. These types of characters will draw our readers in. However, it's a process. To really impact the story, our characters must complement the other literary devices we'll discuss in this 12-part series. So don't get bogged down when you first start. I like to keep things simple and fun. And one question that keeps me on track is asking myself, why does this character matter? See, in order for any character to impact the readers, they must see essentially the meaningful impact that they'll have to the plot, the setting, the theme, and any other important aspects that will shape or move the story forward. Basically, what are they doing for the plot and the theme? Now, that's a little easier said than done. This means we need to know how our characters connect to other elements and the other literary devices in the story. But that's not the only thing that's important when developing our characters. See, there are many moving parts, and these are just the basics. We aren't even covering some of the more nuanced concepts. So a major one to keep in mind is characters should be treated like real people, imperfect and flawed. A great example of well-developed and unique characters that focus on character personality, growth, and flaws is the 2007 Teen Titans series. The personalities in this series are very distinct. Some even follow a very particular trope, which, don't get me started on tropes. Despite these characters following very particular archetypes, they are placed in situations that logically evoke realistic emotions outside of their personality type, making their imperfections more relatable. And the audience accepts this because the contradiction makes sense. The writers give a reason for a character to behave the way they do. A goofy comic relief type character like Beast Boy needs a reason to be serious, or a happy-go-lucky character like Starfire getting angry or jealous needs a reason that the audience will understand. I like to call this character contradictions, and I think this is one of the easiest ways to quickly develop a character you're writing for. Firstly, let me throw this out as a disclaimer: not every character needs this. It's unrealistic in real life for a person to always display one emotion. A person who is always positive might wake up on the wrong side of the bed one day, and because, they slept wrong, they decided to be negative, maybe even cruel. A character who is always happy or who's always sad isn't realistic and doesn't always work. With a story, we must explain a personality change or give a reason why a character made a certain choice. When we pick an archetype and we add a contradiction into the character, this makes them a little more relatable, and sometimes it can even deepen who they are. And I personally find these characters to be the most interesting. So let's get into my personal tips for effective character development. And keep in mind, these are the basics of my method. I actually start by creating a mood board that includes pictures and words. At first, I was opposed to the idea, but the more I used them, the clearer the characters became in my mind. First, give your character a goal, one that will help to be the driving force in the story. I do this for even minor characters. After this, I assign to them 3 simple personality traits. I limit the number to not overcomplicate the character that I'm trying to create, because I'm trying to convey something specific generally. I always do 2 positive and 1 negative trait, and the negative trait will come into play later. Next, explain to yourself in writing why you gave this character that goal. By explaining this character's motivation, it could reveal more about their personality. Fourth, ask yourself, what is keeping them from obtaining their goal? This is the conflict. Now, this is where things start to get real juicy. This could be several things like plot, a villain, themselves, whatever. I love to do a combination of obstacles for my protagonists. However, if I'm doing multiple obstacles, I like to think in terms of major and minor obstacles. For example, the villain may be the obstacle that's front and center. The true obstacle could be the fact that the character must overcome something within themselves to obtain the goal. Next, give the character a secret. And this is if you can. I feel like this can be the secret sauce to really making a character pop, and this is where that negative trait could come into play. Maybe your character is a secret alien and has an addiction, or maybe they're being blackmailed. Nothing stirs interest more in the audience than a character with something to hide. And this could be a secret that the protagonist knows themselves but other characters don't know. Or it could be that this character clearly has something mysterious happening in relation to themselves. And I understand that it can be a little overwhelming when you sit down to start actually crafting your important characters. There are so many roles and character types to create. So I suggest starting small and filling the most important roles for your story. And if you're not sure where to start, check out our video 5 character types your story needs. This is a great starting point. After we've determined the roles of our characters, we can begin incorporating aspects of their personality and what they represent in their design. With a comic, the design can oftentimes go hand in hand with the writing of the character, and sometimes even elevate the meaning of what we're trying to convey. For this aspect, I don't think there are any right or wrong ways to deliver the character to the audience, as long as it's meaningful, as long as you give it some heart. Different creators will focus on different details to deliver and what they feel to be the most meaningful. Maybe for you, it's the character's physical appearance. Everyone is beautiful. Or it's the clothing of the character. The outfits really show who each character is. Or maybe it's something as simple as changing the expressions and mannerisms and the hair color. And by taking the time to do this for important characters, the reader is going to meet more than once. We are making them more memorable. So here's a homework assignment. Without looking at a picture of your main character, comment below a description of your character's personality and physical appearance. Once you've finished with the description, look at the image of your character and tell me if the description for your character matches. If yes, then you've likely designed them with a clear personality and aesthetic in mind. If no, don't worry about it. That just means that your character grew more after you created them into what they are now. So no reader likes a flat or boring protagonist. We need to have more than a vague idea of who the character is before we actually start writing. Now, some writers can completely write their stories without any planning. However, in order for that to be successful, I think a basic understanding fundamentally of how to write characters is required. So don't just throw caution to the wind, please. And in many ways, characters are even more important than the plot, because no matter how unique and compelling the story is, readers most likely won't care if they don't give a crap about the protagonist. I want you to take a moment and do a quick self-reflection exercise. I want you to think of a story you love. Once you have that in mind, be honest. Ask yourself, was it the plot or was it the characters that kept you invested? Now, some of you might say, I love the story for the way it unfolded, and it was most definitely the plot. If this is you, remove the main character or characters from the story. Remove their background, their personalities, their interactions they had, the adventures they went on, and tell me if you feel the story would be the same with another protagonist whose personality and background is completely different. For example, I think about Game of Thrones series. Essentially, the story is about who will end up on the Iron Throne. Therefore, as long as someone ends up on the Iron Throne, then the story's objective is complete. However, why does it matter to us who ends up on the throne? Because we're rooting for the character that we care for. So it's important for our characters' personalities to come across strong. As a Webtoon creator, you're likely releasing singular episodes, meaning readers are consuming the story as you go. They're growing alongside the characters as you crafted and the story. So remember, their perspective is limited to what you've released. you being the creator know the character on a much deeper level. So even if your writing is fantastic and the storyline is gripping, that's awesome. I think you're only about 50% there, which is halfway there, but it definitely leaves room for improvement. I'd say characters take up about a good 30 to 40% of the remaining special sauce you need for the story to be good. So they play a huge part in the development of crafting a good story. But that still leaves 10 to 20% missing. And here's where we start to get into some more advanced advice. As we develop other literary devices, we might begin to ask ourselves things like, is this the right protagonist for the story I'm trying to tell? Are these the right secondary characters that help balance my protagonist? Did I choose the right characters for this scene? Which can only be answered as we develop more aspects of the story. Sometimes the character we start out with isn't the most interesting character we've developed, and unfortunately, they either need to be cut completely, or they need to be combined into another character, or even changed into a minor character despite all of our hard work. But that isn't a bad thing. That just means you've grown as a writer. So lastly, keep in mind, a character does not need to be likable, but they must be interesting, which includes personality and visuals. Creating a boring character is literally a disservice to your time and effort. And while a mastery of plot and theme can help you develop exciting twists and turns, great characters are what draw readers in. Of course, you're all welcome to agree or disagree with my statements. This series is to promote growth and help everyone advance, including myself. Remember, writing is subjective, and there are sometimes viewpoints that will contradict and collide. All I ask is for everyone to be respectful when you leave a comment expressing your counter argument. So here's a preview for our next video, which will focus on developing the basics of writing plot. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, leave us a like, a comment, and most definitely ring the bell. A huge thank you and shout out to all of our patrons. If you'd like to support us while getting some extra content we don't post on Instagram or YouTube, head on over and check out our Patreon. Be sure to follow us on all our social media accounts, link in the description. We are particularly active on Instagram, so if you want to chat with us, then feel free to pop on by. And with that, I thank you for entering the Pantheon.